All right, welcome to York, Maine. In this video, we're going to talk about kind of what it's like to live in York. We've gone over the pros and cons in the past videos, but I want to kind of give you guys a feel for what it's like to live in these towns now. So we're going to kind of drive through the different areas of the town, talk about them a little bit, where your kid's going to go to school, where are the grocery stores, what does it look like driving around. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's get into it. All right, the first thing I wanted to do was mention a little bit of history about the town of York. So it was first founded, or first settled really, in the 1630s, and that makes it one of the oldest towns in the entire state of Maine. The town of York was settled before the state of Maine even became its own separate state from Massachusetts. It used to be a part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and it was basically a small fishing, farming, lumber town. Today, York has over 12,500 residents. It's only about an hour and 15 minutes to Boston, about 15 minutes to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and about 45 minutes up to Portland, Maine. All right, so now we are approaching Short Sands Beach. Short Sands is more of a downtown area than a beach. Don't get me wrong, it still definitely gets used plenty. But people, I think, people tend to be more drawn to Long Sands if they want to go to the beach in the area. So this right here is Short Sands. Off to the left is really where the beach is, the playground. This is more of their downtown area. There's clearly a lot of people out and about. There's a lot more going on. There's plenty of restaurants and shops, and there's a lot to do. Ahead of us is the York's Wild Animal Kingdom. This is a huge attraction to the area. It's more or less for kids more than anything, but a lot of tourists go there. Pretty much anybody locally has been there a time or two. It's a lot of fun. So that was Short Sands. Obviously, it's pretty short, thus the name. But now we're going to head over to Long Sands, and we're just going to take the back roads here. So you can see there's a lot of beautiful houses in this neighborhood, if you will. The houses here do not go for quite as much as the ones on the ocean, but they're really only about a street or two set back. So that's why a lot of people like to buy rental properties in here, investment properties. There are plenty of locals that live in here as well, but it's a very sought after place to live. All right, well, clearly it's very foggy. And so I'm going to insert some drone footage throughout the video, but I'm going to insert some on days where it's not quite as foggy, because clearly I'm not going to get any good footage today. But off to the left is what would normally be a beach. This is really where the main beach is in York. A lot of people from Kittery come over here to go to the beach. Agunquit really has its own setup, but a lot of towns inland will come to York instead of going to towns like Agunquit or Wells, just because of the atmosphere here. It's kind of hard to see with all of the cars parked along the side of the road right now, but there is a sidewalk that runs along the entire length of the beach that people can walk on. Makes it easier getting down to the beach. They have steps and stuff. There's, as you can see, restaurants and shops along the beach, which just makes for kind of a better experience when you're looking for a place to go for the day. As you can see, things clearly get a little bit backed up in this area. The roads are pretty narrow, and there's obviously a lot of tourists in Maine and in New England in general in the summertime, but it does make for things getting a little bit trickier driving around. So yeah, unfortunately, the conditions today are not exactly ideal. It was not this foggy inland where I live, but we're making the best of it. So up here on the right is Liquid Dreams Surf Shop. It's a chain of surf shops in Maine. This one being the oldest of all of them. It was the original. It's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite stores. So back to what I was saying a minute ago, York Beach has a lot of accommodations and just nice little touches that other beaches don't have. The sidewalks, the restaurants, they have really nice public bathrooms. And honestly, the beach is one of the biggest in the state. It's super, super long, obviously why it's called Long Sands, but it's a lot of fun to come here. I've gone out of my way just to come down here and go to the beach here. versus going to towns like Wells and the Gunkwit, which are closer to where I live, just because it's a lot of fun. It's it's a little bit different than a lot of the neighboring towns. Nice to shake it up a little bit. But on the other hand, if you're planning on moving somewhere like York and not just vacationing, because York does have a really awesome beach, it does mean that more tourists are going to want to come to this area. As you can see up the road, today is clearly not a very good beach day, but there was tons of people lined up across still most of the beach, and people don't really seem to care because it's still a lot of fun even on crappy days like today. So if you're planning to move to the area, you do need to take into account that you're going to be dealing with a lot of tourists and you're going to be dealing with a lot of traffic if you move to an area like this. I mentioned in another video that we did how the pricing along the beach here works, and it's kind of obvious, but these beautiful houses that you see along the road right here are obviously going to go for upwards of $1 million. Most of them, the ones that have been updated and are in really good condition, but they're going to go upwards of a couple $1 million. Whereas if you drive, just a street or two back like we were at the beginning of this video, house prices aren't going to be nearly as high. And as far as affordability goes for the beach, of course, they're really not that bad. All right, so this is York High School, which would be grades 9 through 12. York has over 550 students, and it ranks in the top 10% of the state for their testing scores, which obviously makes it a good option for you and your family if you're planning on moving to an area like this. York also has some pretty good extracurricular activities and sports. They have a really good sports program. I know I grew up a few towns over from here, and York was always really big competition. They have some great teams at this school. They definitely put a lot of money and a lot of effort into having a good sports program. And obviously they have good test scores as well. So if you're trying to figure out a good school for your kids to attend, York is definitely not a bad option. All right, so here we are in York's downtown area, if you will. We're maybe about a half a mile from York Harbor, and this is kind of where the homes start to get a little bit more expensive in and around York Harbor. So York has a couple of different neighborhoods, Cape Nettic being one of them, York Harbor being one of them. I'm sure there's another one I'm not thinking of, but York in general is considered a very nice place to live. York Harbor is considered an extremely nice place to live. There are estates in York Harbor that are worth, multi-million dollars. The coastline here is absolutely beautiful. Growing up, coming down here, I used to be in awe of how beautiful some of these homes are, which you'll see here in just a second, just driving around. The properties here a lot of them have more land, and they just tend to be very well manicured, very beautiful homes to live in. There are plenty of people that live in this area year round, and there is a lot of people vacationing here too, but I would say as for tourism, a lot of people want to stay close to short sands and long sands. York Harbor is kind of somewhere they want to go for dinner. It's not necessarily somewhere people are trying to go to the beach or anything like that. If we're trying to explain York Harbor, I would say it's kind of similar to Kittery Point and Biddeford Pool, but even nicer. Just in a sense that those are neighborhoods in different towns in southern Maine that are known to have really, really beautiful properties in them. And so York Harbor is similar in that sense, but with that said, the properties here are just on another level. All right, this is a little bit better. This kind of gives you a feel for what the harbor looks like a little bit. Might be kind of hard for you to see to the left and to the right of the bridge, but lots of boats, lots of beautiful houses. This is why people love staying in this area. All right, now obviously for most locals, this is not somewhere you're going to be living, especially if you're relocating to the area or you're trying to buy a starter home. But it's still important to note that this is still a part of York, and it is still part of your town. So it's kind of cool to drive around and see the different areas and get a feel for what it's like to live here, because this is still what it's like to live in York, Maine. It's still a part of your town. And I know for a lot of people that live in York, even if they're not living in York Harbor or they don't live near the beach, being a part of a town like this just gives people a lot of pride. And that's why so many people love living here. That is York Harbor. And the next thing I want to talk about is the grocery stores in York. So York does have a grocery store, unlike Kittery, its neighboring town, which we covered last week. With that said, York still only has one grocery store. They do have lots of small little markets. I wouldn't really call them grocery stores. So if you're trying to figure out where you're going to get groceries for the week for you and your family, there is really only one option, and that is Hannaford. And because it's the only grocery store in the area, and it's probably the closest grocery store to Kittery, and maybe even towns like Elliott, it is busy. Fortunately, you're still not that far from the border of New Hampshire, so you could easily go to Portsmouth if you wanted to, where there's no sales tax like I've mentioned in the past. But it is nice that York does have a grocery store, unlike some of the neighboring towns. All right, so that was what it's like to live in York, Maine. I hope you found this video helpful. My name's Margaret, and if you have any questions about York, feel free to give us a call, shoot us a text, send an email, or schedule a Zoom call. All that information's in the description below. See you next time.